I spent 6 years eating generic oatmeal and clipping coupons so my parents would not lose their home. I paid their mortgage, their medical bills, and their debts, holding out for my 32nd birthday, the day I would finally inherit my grandfather's trust and start my own life. But yesterday, on my birthday, my debit card declined. When I opened my banking app, my $680,000 trust fund was gone, replaced by a flashing red access denied error. And when the bank told me who took it and how they did it, I realized my family did not just drain my bank account. They committed a felony. My name is Jenna Harper. I am 32 years old, and I work as a medical billing specialist. Before I tell you exactly how I turned a forged signature into a federal indictment that destroyed my parents' perfect suburban facade, please take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you believe that blood does not give anyone the right to steal your future. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. I love reading your responses. Now let me take you to the checkout aisle where my entire world fell apart. I was standing in aisle 4 of an upscale grocery store, staring at a total of $487.52 on the digital register display. My cart was overflowing with imported Brie prosciutto artisanal crackers and expensive floral arrangements. None of it was for me. It was for my younger sister Cassidy's bridal luncheon. My mother Patricia had called me 2 hours earlier in a manufactured panic, claiming her bank card had a fraud alert and she desperately needed me to pick up the supplies. Just this once, Jenna, she had said, her voice dripping with that familiar weaponized guilt. Family steps up for family. Your sister deserves a perfect season. I slid my debit card into the chip reader. I knew my checking account was low. It was always low because my paycheck was systematically drained by my parents' recurring expenses. But I had carefully calculated my budget for the month. I had exactly $512 to my name until Friday. The machine beeped. A sharp, loud, angry sound. Declined. The cashier, a teenager, looking bored and impatient, sighed loudly. "Please try again," he said. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. The woman in line behind me shifted her weight, making a point to check her watch. I pulled the card out, wiped the chip on my jeans, and inserted it again. Beep. Declined. I scrambled for my credit card, the one I kept strictly for absolute emergencies. I inserted it. Beep. Declined. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my chest. I abandoned the cart, muttering a strained apology to the cashier, and practically ran out of the sliding glass doors into the parking lot. I locked the doors of my 12-year-old sedan and gripped the steering wheel, trying to slow my breathing. As a medical billing specialist, my entire professional life revolves around numbers, authorizations, and finding out exactly why claims get rejected. I do not make math errors. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Face recognition authenticated my identity and the dashboard loaded. My checking account showed a negative balance of $34. An automatic payment for my parents' health insurance premium had cleared that morning, pulling more than I anticipated, wiping out my remaining funds and hitting me with an overdraft fee. I squeezed my eyes shut, resting my forehead against the cracked leather of the steering wheel. For 6 years, I had been the invisible pillar holding up my family's pristine image. When I was 26, my father Robert announced that his independent contracting business was failing due to the economy. They were going to lose the 4-bedroom colonial house I grew up in. They were going to lose their health insurance. I stepped in. I took on their mortgage. I paid their utility bills. I wore the same 3 pairs of work slacks until the hems frayed. I skipped dinners with friends, avoided dating, ignored my own dental pain, and brought peanut butter sandwiches to the office for lunch every single day. I justified it because my mother would cry and tell me I was their rock. I justified it because I had a light at the end of the tunnel. My late grandfather, William, a wise man who saw through my parents' endless financial irresponsibility, had left me a trust fund. It contained $680,000, but he had put a strict age lock on it. I could not touch a single penny until my 32nd birthday. He wanted me to be established and mature before inheriting that kind of wealth. He had taken me aside before he died and told me, "This is your shield, Jenna. Do not let them pierce it." My 32nd birthday was yesterday. I had planned to transfer a small portion of the trust to my checking account today. I was going to finally buy myself a reliable car. Finally stop living paycheck to paycheck, and finally tell my parents they needed to support themselves because my days as their safety net were over. I tapped the Accounts tab on the app, scrolling down to where the trust account was always listed in a gray locked status. It was not there. I refreshed the screen. Nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I navigated to the Hidden and Closed Accounts menu. There it was, but the balance read $0. Across the center of the screen in bold red letters was a message I had never seen before. Access denied. Account closed. My hands shook so violently I dropped my phone between the seats. I frantically fished it out and dialed the bank's premium customer service line, the special wealth management number assigned to the trust documents. The automated voice thanked me for calling and placed me on hold. The classical hold music played a cheerful violin piece that mocked the sheer terror coursing through my veins. $680,000. My freedom. My future. My grandfather's legacy. It could not be gone. It had to be a system glitch. A birthday transfer error. Banks make mistakes all the time. Finally, a representative answered. His name was David. I gave him my name, my social security number, my mother's maiden name, and my grandfather's date of birth to verify my identity. I explained the situation, gripping the phone so hard, my knuckles turned white, trying to keep the hysteria out of my voice. I told him my trust account had matured yesterday, but it was showing as closed and zeroed out on the mobile app. David asked me to hold for a moment while he looked into the ledger. The silence on the line stretched for 2 agonizing minutes. When he came back, his voice had lost its standard customer service cheerfulness. It was tight, formal, and strictly professional. "Miss Harper," he said, "that account was fully liquidated and officially closed 21 days ago. The funds were wired to an external account at a different financial institution." I stopped breathing. The air in my car suddenly felt too thick, too heavy to inhale. "Liquidated?" I asked, my voice cracking. "That is impossible. The trust was legally locked until I turned 32. I did not authorize any transfer. I have not signed a single piece of paper. I have not stepped foot in a bank branch in 2 years." David's keyboard clicked rapidly on his end. "Miss Harper, the transfer was not authorized by you directly. It was authorized by your designated legal representative. The funds were released prior to the maturity date under a catastrophic medical hardship clause." A medical hardship clause. My brain raced trying to process the terminology. I was perfectly healthy. Who authorized it? I demanded, the panic now hardening into something cold, sharp, and terrifyingly clear. "The transaction was executed via a durable power of attorney." David explained gently, the kind of voice you use when delivering catastrophic news. "According to the legal documents submitted and verified by our fraud and compliance department, you assigned full financial and medical power of attorney to your father, Robert Harper. The document was notarized, filed, and executed 3 weeks ago. He invoked the medical hardship clause, closed the account, and wired the entirety of the funds. A power of attorney." The words echoed in the small, suffocating space of my car. A legal document that hands over total control of your life, your assets, your signature, and your decisions to someone else. "I have never designated a power of attorney," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I have never signed over my rights to my father." "I am very sorry, Miss Harper," David said quietly, "but we have a legally binding notarized document on file with your exact signature. As far as the bank is concerned, your father had absolute legal authority to drain that account." I ended the call and sat in the parking lot of that grocery store, staring blindly at the dashboard. My parents had not just relied on my generosity. They had not just taken advantage of my loyalty to pay their mortgage while my father refused to work. They had meticulously, intentionally forged my signature to steal over $500,000 of my inheritance. They had bypassed the age lock. They had stolen my future. and they had done it while continuing to demand I buy imported cheese for my sister's bridal luncheon. I did not cry. I did not scream or beat my hands against the steering wheel. The obedient self-sacrificing daughter who just wanted her family's love died right there in the front seat of my beat-up car. In her place, a medical billing specialist who understood every single loophole, every tracking code, and every single paper trail woke up. My parents thought I was just their silent, compliant ATM. They thought because I was quiet, I was stupid. They forgot that I tracked discrepancies and fraudulent claims for a living. I know how to find the missing numbers. I know how to build a case. They thought they had won. They thought they had secured their wealth and Cassidy's perfect wedding at my expense, but they made one massive, arrogant mistake. They left a paper trail, and I was about to audit their entire lives. I left my cart right there in aisle 4. I did not care about the imported brie, the expensive crackers, or the lavish floral arrangements my mother had demanded I pick up for my sister's bridal event. I drove straight from the grocery store to the main branch of my bank downtown. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The radio was off. The only sound in the car was the harsh thud of my own heartbeat drumming in my ears. I remember the weather was absurdly beautiful. It was a crisp, clear spring afternoon in the suburbs. People were walking their dogs along the manicured sidewalks. Children were riding bikes in the cul-de-sacs. Normal people were living normal lives, completely unaware that my entire reality was burning to the ground. When I pulled into the bank parking lot, I turned off the engine and just sat there in the heavy silence of my 12-year-old sedan. I needed to compose myself. In my line of work as a medical billing specialist, I deal with massive insurance companies that routinely deny life-saving treatments over a single misplaced billing code or a missing signature. I know exactly how massive bureaucracies function. I know that if you walk into a corporate office crying, shaking, and hysterical, they will immediately dismiss you. They will offer you a tissue, tell you they are so very sorry for your situation, and then do absolutely nothing to actually help you. I could not afford to be hysterical. I needed to be cold. I needed to be an auditor. I took a deep breath, smoothed the wrinkles from my cheap work blouse, and walked through the double glass doors. The bank lobby was heavily air-conditioned and smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fresh carpet. I marched straight past the velvet ropes of the teller line and approached the main receptionist's desk. I did not ask for help. I demanded it. I told her my trust account had been unauthorizedly liquidated and I needed to sit down with the branch manager immediately. She gave me a polite, condescending smile and tried to tell me I needed to schedule an appointment for later in the week. I leaned forward and lowered my voice to that specific, unwavering pitch that signals an impending legal nightmare. I informed her that over $500,000 had vanished from their institution, and if a manager was not sitting across from me in exactly 3 minutes, my next conversation would be with the State Banking Commission and the local police department. I was sitting in a glass-walled office exactly 2 minutes later. The branch manager was a middle-aged man named Mr. Davis. He wore a slightly wrinkled gray suit and looked profoundly uncomfortable. I sat across his polished mahogany desk and placed my driver license firmly on the blotter. "I want the complete transaction history for my trust account," I said, "and I want the physical copies of the authorization documents that allowed someone else to drain $680,000 on my 32nd birthday." Mr. Davis typed nervously on his keyboard. He tried to offer me a bottle of water. He tried to give me the standard corporate platitudes about protocol security measures and the rigorous verification processes the bank employs. I just stared at him, refusing to fill the awkward silence. Finally, the heavy commercial printer in the corner of his office began to hum. Page after page slid into the output tray. To him, it was just standard administrative paperwork. To me, it was the autopsy report of my family. Mr. Davis gathered the pages, stapled them together with meticulous care, and slid the thick stack across the desk. "Miss Harper," he said softly, "as the phone representative likely mentioned to you, the transaction was completely by the book from our end. The withdrawal was executed under a durable power of attorney with a catastrophic medical hardship addendum. I pulled the packet toward me. The cover page bore a bold, unforgiving title: Durable Power of Attorney. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon. The heavy paragraphs outlining the total surrender of my financial autonomy, my medical decisions, and my legal rights. The document effectively stripped me of my own agency, handing over my entire life to a designated agent. And then I saw the name printed on the line of the designated agent: Robert James Harper. My father. The man whose mortgage I'd been paying for 6 long years because he claimed his independent contracting business was destroyed by the economy. The man who sat at the head of our dining table every Sunday and carved the roast while letting me wear shoes with holes in the soles. The man who had patted my shoulder and told me how proud he was of my strong work ethic while gladly taking my meager paycheck to keep his lights on. I flipped to the signature page and my stomach plummeted straight to the floor. Right there on the line designated for the principal was my name: Jenna Marie Harper. It was not a sloppy scribble or a rushed fake. It was an incredibly good forgery. It had the exact same loop on the J and the same sharp, distinct slant on the H that I always used. Someone had practiced this. Someone had sat down with my old birthday cards, my old school papers, or my tax returns, and traced the curves of my identity over and over again until they perfected the art of stealing my life. But I knew it was not mine. Because I studied documents for a living, I could see the slight hesitation in the ink. I could see the lack of natural fluid pressure. It was a calculated, deliberate lie. I traced my finger over the fake signature, feeling a physical wave of nausea wash over me. But then my eyes drifted down to the bottom right corner of the page, the notary section. This was the official seal required by law to verify that I had been sitting in the room presenting a valid government ID and signing this document of my own free will. There was a circular stamp pressed firmly into the paper. It certified the signature as legitimate and legally binding, and right on top of that stamp was the signature of the notary public, Susan Miller. I stared at the name. The letters seemed to vibrate on the page. Susan Miller. Susan was not just some random bank employee. She was not a stranger at a local shipping store. Susan Miller was my mother Patricia's absolute best friend. They had co-chaired the Suburban Church Hospitality Committee together for 15 years. Susan was the woman who brought potato salad to our summer barbecues. She was the woman who sat in our kitchen drinking iced tea while my mother complained about how expensive my sister Cassidy's upcoming high society wedding was going to be. Susan had known me since I was a teenager. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit me so hard the breath literally left my lungs. My parents did not just walk into a bank and make a desperate, panicked mistake out of sudden financial ruin. They had conspired. They had brought another person into their scheme. They had sat down with their church friend, probably over coffee and scones, and convinced her to stamp a fraudulent legal document. They had premeditated a felony using their comfortable suburban social circle to execute the ultimate theft. The conflict inside me pivoted instantly. This was no longer just panic about missing money. This was a simmering, deeply personal outrage. I realized in that sterile bank office that I had not just been supporting them all these years. I had been targeted by them. They had weaponized my love and my sense of duty. They had gladly taken my money every 2 weeks, letting me eat generic brand oatmeal for dinner, while they slept under a roof I paid for. And all the while they were plotting to rob me of my grandfather's legacy. They saw me as a resource. They saw me as a naive, invisible, convenient little fool who would just roll over and accept her fate because family always means sacrifice. Mr. Davis cleared his throat, clearly unnerved by the heavy, suffocating silence in the office. "Miss Harper," he said carefully, "if you are alleging that this document is fraudulent, you will need to file a formal dispute with our fraud department. But I have to warn you, overturning a notarized power of attorney is incredibly difficult. The bank acted in good faith based on the presence of the official state notary seal and the corresponding identification logs provided by your father." I looked up at him. The panic that had been choking me in the grocery store parking lot was completely gone. The fear of confrontation was gone. The desperate, sad little girl who just wanted her parents to finally be proud of her was dead. What replaced those emotions was an absolute icy clarity. I gathered the papers and placed them neatly into my purse. I did not shed a single tear in that office. I looked at the branch manager and offered a tight, polite smile that did not reach my eyes. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Davis," I said. "I will not be filing an internal dispute with your fraud department today." He looked visibly relieved, his shoulders dropping slightly. He probably thought I was just going to accept the loss and walk away to avoid an ugly public family drama. "I will be filing a report with the police." I continued, my voice steady and cold. "Because your institution did not just process a routine withdrawal, you facilitated grand larceny. Have a wonderful afternoon." I walked out of the bank with my shoulders pulled back and my spine perfectly straight. I stepped back out into the bright suburban sunlight, holding the undeniable proof of my family's treachery in my bag. They had taken my $680,000. They thought they had finally secured their wealth and guaranteed my sister her lavish status-obsessed wedding. They thought I would stay quiet and keep playing the role of the good, compliant daughter. They had no idea that they had just handed an expert auditor the exact paper trail needed to send them all to federal prison. The engine of my car hummed a rough, uneven tune as I drove away from the bank, but I barely registered the sound. My mind was entirely consumed by the piece of paper resting on the passenger seat. The forged power of attorney. The drive from the commercial downtown district to my parents' sprawling suburban neighborhood took exactly 22 minutes. I counted every single one of them. The transition from the busy city streets to the quiet tree-lined avenues of their subdivision felt like crossing into an alternate reality. This was a world of perfectly manicured lawns, pristine paved driveways, and heavy oak front doors. It was a world I had personally subsidized with my own sweat and sheer exhaustion for the past 6 years. I pulled my battered sedan up to the curb outside their 4-bedroom colonial house. The property looked immaculate in the afternoon sun. Fresh premium mulch filled the flower beds, and a newly installed brass light fixture gleamed beside the front entrance. A wave of profound, sickening disgust washed over me. I had paid the property taxes that kept them in this beautiful house. I had covered the exorbitant utility bills that kept those brand new lights burning. And their gratitude was to steal $680,000 from me the moment they had the chance. I did not bother knocking. I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped into the foyer. The house smelled intensely of roasted garlic rosemary and expensive vanilla boutique candles. From the formal dining room, the sound of light melodic laughter drifted through the air. It was a picture-perfect Sunday afternoon in the Harper household. I walked down the hallway, my low heels sinking into the plush, expensive carpet they had installed just last year. When I turned the corner into the dining room, the scene laid out before me was almost comical in its utter detachment from my dark reality. My younger sister, Cassidy, was sprawled across the head of the massive mahogany table. She was 29 years old and the undisputed golden child of our family. She held a crystal glass of imported white wine in one hand and a glossy bridal magazine in the other. Her engagement ring, a massive, brilliant cut diamond, given to her by Bryce Kensington, the heir to a prominent local real estate empire, caught the afternoon light and scattered prisms across the walls. My mother, Patricia, was standing over a dizzying array of expensive fabric swatches and imported floral catalogs, humming a cheerful tune. My father, Robert, sat in his favorite leather armchair by the large bay window, swirling a glass of amber bourbon and casually flipping through a golf magazine. "Oh, Jenna," my mother chirped, barely looking up from a pile of heavy silk ribbons. "You are finally here. Did you bring the catering samples I asked for? The bakery was supposed to include the miniature crab cakes. Bryce's mother specifically requested them for the cocktail hour, and we simply cannot disappoint the Kensingtons today." Cassidy let out a dramatic, exaggerated sigh, tossing her thick magazine onto the table. "Honestly, Mom, if the crab cakes are wrong, we will just have the wedding planner fire the caterer on Monday. We are paying them an absolute fortune. They need to get the menu perfectly right." This entire season has been incredibly stressful for me, and I just need everyone to be on the exact same page. I stood at the edge of the dining room. I did not take off my coat. I did not offer a polite greeting. I reached into my purse, pulled out the folded stamped copy of the power of attorney I had just received from the bank manager, and walked deliberately toward the table. I moved Cassidy's bridal catalogs aside with the back of my hand and slapped the legal document down onto the polished wood. The sharp cracking sound of paper hitting mahogany echoed through the room, instantly killing the festive suburban mood. "What is this, Robert?" I asked. My voice was completely flat. There was no tremor, no hesitation, no underlying panic. I did not look at my mother or my sister. I stared directly into my father's eyes. Robert lowered his glass of bourbon. His relaxed patriarchal posture stiffened instantly. He looked down at the document on the table, and for a fleeting fraction of a second, I saw raw, unfiltered panic flash across his familiar features. He recognized the heavy embossed bank seal on the corner of the page. Patricia stopped humming her cheerful tune. She looked from me to my father and then down at the table. Her face lost its color so fast she looked physically ill. "I asked you a direct question," I said, keeping my tone deadly quiet. "What is this piece of paper, and why does it have my forged signature and Susan Miller's notary stamp sitting at the bottom of it? Why did the bank manager just tell me that my trust account, the one Grandpa William left exclusively for my future, currently has a zero balance?" Cassidy scoffed, clearly annoyed that the spotlight had shifted away from her luxurious floral arrangements. "Jenna, what are you even talking about? Stop being so dramatic. We are trying to finalize the seating chart for the rehearsal dinner, and you are ruining the vibe." No one answered her. The silence in the room grew so heavy it felt physically difficult to breathe. I watched my parents share a long, deeply communicative look. It was the specific look of two guilty conspirators realizing their quiet, invisible victim had just broken the lock on the basement door. But what happened next was worse than a blatant denial. It was worse than a tearful apology. It was the absolute breathtaking audacity of their justification. Robert slowly placed his bourbon glass on the side table. He steepled his fingers together, adopting the calm, authoritative tone he used to use when lecturing me about fiscal responsibility when I was a teenager. "Jenna, please sit down," he said smoothly, gesturing to an empty chair. "There is no need for this kind of ungrateful hostility. We were going to sit you down and discuss this transition with you after the wedding festivities concluded. We just did not want to burden you with complicated financial restructuring right now while you are so busy at work." Restructuring. I repeated the word, tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. "You call forging my legal signature to steal $680,000 a simple restructuring?" Patricia stepped forward, instantly slipping into her favorite role as the weary, misunderstood matriarch. "Jenna, you are using very ugly, aggressive words," she said, placing a delicate hand over her heart. "No one stole anything from you. We simply borrowed the funds for a temporary period. Your father has been under immense pressure lately. His contracting business had some unexpected liabilities hit all at once. We were facing severe financial penalties. We needed immediate liquidity, and that money was just sitting there in a locked account doing absolutely nothing for anyone." Doing nothing, I shot back, feeling my blood pressure rise. It was maturing for my 32nd birthday. It was my money, my future, and you took all of it. Every single cent is gone. That amount does not just cover a struggling business debt. Where did the rest of it actually go? Robert avoided my direct gaze, but Cassidy rolled her eyes and crossed her arms in a huff. "Oh my gosh, Jenna," she snapped, sounding exactly like a spoiled teenager. "Mom and Dad needed major help with the wedding. Do you have any idea how much a Kensington-level event actually costs in this economy? The lakeside venue alone was $50,000 just to secure the date. The custom floral installations, the imported champagne, the 10-piece live band. We are looking at $150,000 minimum. Bryce's family expects a very certain standard from us. I cannot just get married in a local community banquet hall like some nobody." I stared at my younger sister in absolute paralyzing horror. She was sitting there drinking wine I had unwittingly paid for, complaining about the high cost of a luxury wedding that was entirely funded by my stolen inheritance. She felt entirely entitled to my grandfather's money simply because her new social status demanded it, and my parents had gladly committed a federal felony just to give it to her. "You have no right to be this angry with us," Patricia said, her voice taking on a sharp defensive edge meant to cut me down. "We raised you, Jenna. We put a solid roof over your head. We clothed you and fed you for 18 years. Do you have any idea what that truly costs a family? You owe us for everything you have right now. We are your family, and we are supposed to share our resources when times get tough. You have a good, stable job in medical billing. You do not even need a massive trust fund. You live so simply anyway. Cassidy needs to establish her new life with Bryce in the right social circles, and that requires capital." I stood rooted to the hardwood floor, listening to the people who were supposed to protect me actively justify ruining my life. For 6 long years, I had sacrificed my own comfort to keep a roof over their heads. I had worn cheap clothes and eaten cheap food, completely convinced I was doing the noble, loving thing by supporting my struggling parents through a rough patch. And the entire time they viewed my sacrifices not as an act of profound love, but as an absolute expectation. They saw my frugality not as financial discipline, but as proof that I did not deserve nice things. They genuinely believed that because I was the quiet, practical daughter, my resources rightfully belonged to the beautiful, charismatic daughter. "I am not talking about sharing family resources," I said, my voice rising in volume and cutting through the room. "I am talking about premeditated fraud. You conspired with Susan Miller to bypass a legal banking age lock. You illegally routed my inheritance into your own pockets, so Cassidy could show off for a wealthy man who does not even know she is actually bankrupt. I want every single dollar transferred back into my name by tomorrow morning, or I'm going to the authorities." Robert stood up abruptly, his face flushing dark red with sudden anger. He pointed a thick, accusatory finger directly at my chest. "Listen to me very carefully, Jenna," he growled, dropping the calm businessman act. "You are going to calm down and stop throwing around ridiculous legal accusations in this house. The money is gone. It is tied up in non-refundable vendor deposits, the Elite Country Club reservation, and settling my overdue business accounts. We will pay you back eventually over time when the housing market improves. But right now, you are going to drop this and walk away." Patricia moved closer to my father, crossing her arms to form a united front. "If you make a fuss about this, Jenna, if you try to ruin your sister's perfect season over money, you will destroy this family forever. We will cut you out completely. You will not be welcome at the wedding. You will not be welcome in this house ever again. Everyone in our church community knows how hard we have worked to provide for you. If you go out there and start telling malicious lies about us, we will tell everyone the truth about how selfish, greedy, and ungrateful you have become. You will be entirely alone." "Yes," Jenna Cassidy whined, pouring herself another full glass of wine from the crystal decanter. "Why do you always have to make everything about you? This is supposed to be the happiest time of my entire life, and you are standing here screaming about banking errors and paperwork. Just let Mom and Dad handle it like they always do. You are being incredibly toxic right now." I looked at the 3 of them standing there, my father hiding his grand theft behind a mask of false authority, my mother wielding emotional blackmail like a blunt instrument to keep me in line, my sister drowning in her own delusions of grandeur, completely disconnected from basic moral reality. They were standing united against me, entirely confident that their combined psychological pressure would force me to back down. They assumed I would simply absorb this massive financial loss, just like I had absorbed every other heavy burden they had placed on my shoulders for the past 6 years. They thought the threat of being cast out of the family would terrify me into silent submission. But as I stood in that beautifully decorated stolen dining room, smelling the expensive vanilla candles and looking at the glossy bridal magazines bought with my money, the fear of losing them completely vanished. It evaporated into thin air. You cannot lose something you never really had in the first place. They did not love me. They loved what they could seamlessly extract from me. They were absolutely right about one thing. The family dynamic was about to be destroyed. But I was not going to be the one destroyed by it. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply reached out, picked up the copied pages of the forged power of attorney from the mahogany table, and folded them carefully back into my purse. "I am not being toxic, Cassidy," I said softly, looking my sister dead in the eyes. "I am being audited, and I am not going to ruin your perfect season. I am just going to make sure everyone in your new high society circle knows exactly who paid for it." I turned my back off them and walked straight out the front door. The heavy oak slammed shut behind me, echoing loudly and severing my ties to that house forever. I walked down the pristine paved driveway to my battered car, my mind already calculating the complex next steps. They thought they could casually bully me into silence. They thought I was just a glorified secretary who pushed boring medical papers all day. They had vastly underestimated what a billing specialist learns about the relentless, unforgiving nature of a permanent paper trail. "I need the money returned to my account by tomorrow morning," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "Every single dollar, or I am walking straight to the police." The shift in my father was instantaneous. The patronizing, exasperated dad routine melted away, revealing something cold and deeply vicious beneath. He stood up from his leather chair, planting his feet firmly on the hardwood floor, and took 2 slow steps toward me. He was a tall man, and he used his physical presence the way he used his voice as a weapon of intimidation. "Are you threatening me, Jenna?" he asked, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly register that used to terrify me when I was a little girl. "You are standing in my house threatening to call the authorities on your own flesh and blood. Over what?" "A temporary cash flow solution. It is grand theft," I corrected him, refusing to step back. "It is identity fraud. And it is my future." My mother stepped up beside him, her face pulled into a mask of pure indignation. "How dare you," she spat. "After everything we have done for you, after we put a roof over your head and fed you, you would destroy your sister's wedding week. You would send your own parents to jail because you are too selfish to share." "I am not sharing," I said. "I was robbed." Robert slammed his hand down on the back of a dining chair. The loud smack made Cassidy jump, her wine sloshing over the rim of her crystal glass. "Listen to me very carefully," he growled. "You are not going to the police. You are not going to talk to a lawyer. You are going to walk out that door, cool off, and realize what is at stake here." He stepped closer, invading my personal space, his eyes narrowed into dark, menacing slits. "Because if you make a fuss about this, Jenna, if you breathe a single word of this to anyone, you are dead to us. You will no longer be a part of this family. We will cut you off completely." I looked at him, feeling my heart pound against my ribs. "You already cut me off," I reminded him. "You stole everything I had." "Oh, I will do much worse than that," he warned, leaning in so close I could smell the sharp tang of bourbon on his breath. "You know exactly how this community works. We have lived in this suburb for 30 years. We built this church congregation. We know your boss. We know your landlord. We know every single person in your small, boring little world. If you try to drag our names through the mud, Patricia and I will make sure everyone knows exactly how unstable you are." My mother nodded vigorously, her eyes flashing with a cruel, vindictive light. "We will tell them all how you had a mental breakdown," she added smoothly, already crafting the narrative in real time. "We will say you became pathologically jealous of Cassidy's engagement. We will tell the pastor, the prayer circle, and the neighbors that you started making up vicious lies to ruin your sister's happiness because you could not stand being single and miserable. Who do you think they will believe, Jenna? The respected pillars of the community or the bitter, isolated spinster sister who always harbored a grudge?" Cassidy chimed in from the table, scrolling on her phone again, as if my absolute ruin was just a minor inconvenience to her day. "Honestly, Jenna, you are acting crazy. Just drop it. Mom and Dad always handle things. You are going to embarrass yourself if you throw a tantrum publicly." I stood there looking at the 3 of them. They were a united front of toxicity, entirely confident that their threats would work. They relied on the fact that I had spent my entire life avoiding conflict, craving their approval, and shrinking myself to keep the peace. They genuinely believed that the threat of public humiliation and family excommunication would be enough to force me into swallowing a $680,000 theft. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg for their love, to apologize for overreacting, and to slink back to my cheap apartment in defeat. I did not shed a single tear. I felt my jaw set, my spine straighten, and a strange, unfamiliar warmth flood my veins. It was not sorrow. It was not grief. It was pure, unadulterated, blinding anger. "I will give you until tomorrow morning," I said softly. And then I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. I heard my father shouting my name as I reached the front door, demanding that I come back and apologize. But I did not stop. I pulled the heavy oak door open and let it slam shut behind me, the sound echoing across their perfectly manicured front lawn. I walked down the pristine paved driveway to my 12-year-old sedan. My hands were shaking, but as I jammed the key into the ignition, I realized the trembling was not from fear. It was adrenaline. I pulled out of the cul-de-sac and drove through the affluent suburban neighborhood. As I passed the sprawling brick homes, the pristine landscaping, and the luxury SUVs parked in wide driveways, the reality of my entire existence snapped into sharp, brutal focus. For my entire life, I had been the scapegoat. I had been the beast of burden carrying the weight of their extravagant illusions. I drove through the neighborhood I had literally subsidized, remembering every single time I had put myself last so they could pretend to be first. My mind flooded with a lifetime of stark, undeniable contrasts. I remembered being 17, walking 3 miles to my after-school job in the pouring rain because my shoes had holes in the soles and my parents said things were too tight to buy me a new pair. That exact same week, Cassidy had paraded into the living room, twirling in a $400 designer prom dress, while my mother clapped and took photos. Things were tight for the practical daughter, but the golden child required an audience and a lavish budget. I remembered being 24, working overtime on weekends to pay off my own modest student loans, sitting at my small kitchen table eating rice and beans. That was the year my father claimed his contracting business had taken a massive hit and begged me to cover their property taxes so they would not lose the family home. I drained my savings account to write them a check. 2 months later, they posted 70 photos online from a 2-week luxury cruise down the Rhine River in Europe. When I gently questioned how they could afford a river cruise after nearly losing their house, my mother had sighed heavily and told me they needed the vacation for their mental health and that I was being incredibly unsupportive of their overall well-being. It had always been like this. I was the reliable one, the boring one, the one who understood duty and quiet obligation. They praised my independence only because it meant they never had to spend a single dime on me. They praised my strong work ethic only because it meant I had a steady paycheck they could conveniently tap into whenever their own reckless spending caught up with them. I gripped the steering wheel as I navigated onto the highway heading back toward the city. The most painful realization was not the loss of the money. It was the absolute crushing clarity of how they actually viewed me. Parents are supposed to protect their children. They are supposed to be the safe harbor in a cruel world. But my parents had never seen me as a daughter to be nurtured or protected. I was simply an asset. I was a resource to be managed, mined, and ultimately liquidated to fund the daughter they actually valued. They did not love me. They loved what I could provide for them. And when my regular paychecks were no longer enough to maintain their facade and fund Cassidy's high society wedding, they simply escalated their extraction methods. They bypassed my meager bank account and went straight for my grandfather's trust, forging my name without a second thought, completely indifferent to the fact that they were destroying my financial future. They thought I was an acceptable casualty in their desperate quest for suburban status. I finally pulled into the cramped parking lot of my apartment complex. The building was old, the paint was peeling, and the outdoor hallway smelled faintly of damp carpet and stale cooking oil. I climbed the 2 flights of stairs to my 1-bedroom unit, unlocked the deadbolt, and stepped inside. The silence of my apartment was absolute. I dropped my keys on the counter and walked into the small kitchen. I filled a glass of tap water and stood by the sink, looking out the narrow window at the brick wall of the adjacent building. My father had promised to ruin me. My mother had promised to destroy my professional and personal reputation. They thought they held all the cards because they controlled the social narrative in their affluent little bubble. They thought my deep fear of being ostracized would keep me completely paralyzed. They profoundly misunderstood who they were dealing with. I am a medical billing specialist. My entire professional existence is dedicated to navigating complex hostile systems designed to deny, deflect, and deceive. Every single day I go up against massive corporate insurance companies that use intimidation tactics, confusing jargon, and buried clauses to avoid paying what is rightfully owed. I do not get emotional when a claim is rejected. I do not cry when a representative threatens to close a case permanently. I pull the ledgers. I track the reference codes. I cross-reference the dates, the signatures, and the authorizations. I dig through the fine print until I find the exact mathematical proof of their liability. I build a paper trail so undeniable, so structurally sound, that the opposing side has absolutely no choice but to surrender. I sat down at my small, wobbly dining table and opened my laptop. I did not shed a tear. I did not scream into a pillow. The time for grieving the family I wished I had was officially over. My parents had assumed my silence was a symptom of weakness. They thought my lifelong compliance meant I lacked a spine. They failed to realize that living in the shadows for 32 years had made me incredibly observant. I knew their daily habits. I knew their banking routines. I knew exactly how heavily they relied on maintaining their flawless public image among their wealthy peers. They had forged my signature. They had stolen my grandfather's legacy. They had threatened to destroy my good name. I pulled up a blank spreadsheet on my screen and labeled the first column with a single decisive keystroke. Evidence. I was not going to play their emotional games. I was not going to engage in a screaming match or a public shouting war at the local country club. I was going to audit them. I was going to forensically dismantle every single lie they had ever told, trace every single dollar they had ever stolen, and build a criminal case so completely airtight that no amount of suburban charm or church committee influence could ever save them from the consequences. They wanted to treat me like a liquid asset. I was going to show them exactly what happens when an asset aggressively audits the books. I vowed right then and there to take back my future, to recover every penny of my grandfather's trust, and to completely systematically dismantle their perfect, fraudulent lives. I did not sleep a single wink that night. I sat at my small kitchen table, illuminated only by the harsh blue light of my laptop screen. I brewed pot after pot of dark, bitter coffee and let the caffeine fuel the cold, mechanical focus taking over my brain. I knew I needed legal representation, but I did not want a friendly neighborhood family lawyer. I did not want a mediator who would sit me down in a room with my parents and try to negotiate a tearful suburban reconciliation. I needed a shark. I needed someone who looked at financial discrepancies the same way a predator looks at a bleeding wound. I spent hours reading State Bar Association records, reviewing corporate litigation outcomes, and scrolling through client testimonials. By the time the sun began to rise over the city, I had found him. His name was Thomas Sterling. He was dual licensed as a forensic accountant and an estate attorney. His online reviews described him as ruthlessly efficient, completely devoid of sentimentality, and devastatingly effective in court. He was exactly the kind of man you hired when you wanted to burn a fraudulent empire to the ground and salt the earth behind you. I called his office the second their phone lines opened at 8 in the morning. I did not ask for a consultation. I told his receptionist I had a documented case of a $680,000 trust fund theft involving forged legal instruments, and I was willing to pay his emergency retainer fee in cash right now. I was sitting in his downtown corner office exactly 3 hours later. Thomas Sterling was a man in his late 50s with sharp gray eyes and a tailored suit that probably cost more than my entire car. His office was intimidating by design. There were no family photos on his massive glass desk, no warm touches, just towering shelves of legal volumes, and a spectacular view of the city skyline. He sat back in his ergonomic leather chair and steepled his fingers, studying me silently. I am sure he was used to dealing with sobbing heirs and hysterical family members fighting over estates. I was neither of those things. I was a medical billing specialist. I lived and breathed documentation. I reached into my canvas tote bag and pulled out a thick 3-ring binder. I had spent the entire night organizing it. I placed it squarely in the center of his glass desk. "Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice completely level. "Inside this binder, you will find 6 years of detailed financial ledgers. You will find every single bank transfer, every canceled check, and every utility payment I have ever made on behalf of my parents, Robert and Patricia Harper. You will see that I have personally subsidized their mortgage, their health insurance, and their daily living expenses for over half a decade. Behind that section, you will find the original trust documents established by my late grandfather. And finally, in the front pocket, you will find a stamped copy of a durable power of attorney that was executed 3 weeks ago without my knowledge, which my parents used to illegally drain my entire inheritance." Thomas raised a single eyebrow. He leaned forward, picked up the binder, and opened it. The silence in the room was absolute as he flipped through the pages. I watched his eyes track over my meticulous spreadsheets. I had color-coded the transactions: red for their property taxes, blue for their medical premiums, green for the direct cash transfers my father had begged for to save his failing business. I had provided exact routing numbers and transaction dates. "You built a very impressive audit," he murmured, his tone shifting from polite detachment to genuine professional respect. "Most clients come to me with a shoebox full of crumpled receipts and a very messy emotional narrative. You have handed me a turnkey investigation." "I audit fraudulent claims for a living," I replied simply. "I know how to track a missing dollar." Thomas turned to the front pocket of the binder and pulled out the copy of the power of attorney. He adjusted his glasses and began to read the document with clinical precision. He examined the language, the clauses, and the specific addendums my father had used to bypass the age lock on the trust account. He spent a long time looking at the signature line at the bottom of the page. "This is an exceptionally good forgery," Jenna Thomas noted, tracing the air above my fake signature with the tip of his expensive pen. "If I were a bank manager looking at this quickly, I would absolutely believe it was yours. The pressure points are slightly off, which a handwriting expert can easily prove in court. But for a standard suburban bank withdrawal, it is more than enough to pass a casual inspection." "My parents had 32 years to study my handwriting," I said, feeling a familiar wave of disgust wash over me. "They knew exactly how I loop my letters." Thomas nodded slowly, his eyes scanning down to the bottom right corner of the page. He frowned slightly, bringing the document closer to his face. "And what about this notary?" he asked. "Susan Miller. Does this name mean anything to you?" "She is my mother's absolute best friend," I answered, the anger rising hot and bright in my chest. "They have served on the same church hospitality committee for 15 years. Susan comes to our house for Sunday dinners. She has known me since I was in middle school." My parents did not just walk into a random shipping store to get this stamped. They sat down with their closest friend and orchestrated this theft together. Thomas tapped his pen against the desk, his mind clearly racing through legal strategies. A corrupt notary complicates things, but it also opens up an entirely new avenue of liability. If Susan Miller willingly stamped a forged document, she is looking at losing her commission and facing severe criminal charges. But right now, it is a game of credibility. Your parents will claim you signed this document willingly and simply changed your mind after the fact due to some family dispute. Susan Miller will back up their story to protect herself from prison. They will say you were sitting right there in her living room presenting your identification and handing over your financial rights. We need something concrete. We need an alibi that shatters their timeline completely." Thomas looked down at the notary stamp again. The date of execution, he read aloud. October 14th of last year. The date hung in the air. October 14th. I stopped breathing. The sound of the city traffic outside the thick glass windows faded away completely. My heart gave a massive, violent lurch against my ribs. October 14th. I closed my eyes, letting my memory rewind through the past 12 months. I track everything on a calendar. Every medical appointment, every billing cycle, every corporate compliance trip. October 14th of last year was not just a random autumn day. I opened my eyes and looked directly at Thomas. A slow, chilling realization was spreading through my entire body. I could feel the blood rushing to my fingertips. "Mr. Sterling," I whispered, my voice trembling for the first time since I walked into his office. On October 14th of last year, I was not sitting in Susan Miller's suburban living room. I was not anywhere near my parents or their church friends. Thomas stopped tapping his pen. "Where were you, Jenna?" "I was in Denver, Colorado." I said the words tumbling out of my mouth as the sheer magnitude of their mistake fully dawned on me. My company sent me to Denver for a massive week-long medical billing compliance seminar, but I never made it to the conference. On the morning of October 13th, I woke up in my hotel room with agonizing, blinding pain in my lower abdomen. I had to call down to the hotel front desk to get an ambulance. My appendix had ruptured. Thomas sat perfectly still, his sharp gray eyes locking onto mine. I was rushed into emergency surgery that same afternoon. I continued, my voice growing stronger, louder, fueled by a mixture of profound betrayal and overwhelming vindication. On October 14th, the exact day my parents claim I was cheerfully signing over my life savings in their quiet suburban town, I was lying in a hospital bed at Denver General. I was heavily medicated on intravenous painkillers. I had a drainage tube in my side. I was physically incapacitated 2 states and 1,000 miles away from that notary stamp. Thomas actually dropped his pen. It clattered against the glass desk. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a shark tasting blood in the water. "Are you absolutely certain?" he asked, his voice dropping into a low, intense register. "Jenna, do you have the records to prove this?" I practically lunged for my tote bag. I pulled out my laptop, flipped it open, and rapidly typed in my password. My hands flew across the keyboard as I logged into my company's travel portal and my personal medical insurance portal. I did not just have records. I had a fortress of documentation. I turned the laptop screen around so Thomas could see it. "Here's my flight itinerary. Showing my departure to Denver on October 12th, I said, pointing to the screen. "Here's the corporate credit card receipt showing the hotel check-in. And here," I clicked over to the medical portal, "is the itemized hospital bill from Denver General. It details the emergency appendectomy, the anesthesia logs, and the continuous inpatient care room charges spanning from October 13th through October 17th. It clearly shows the dates of admission and discharge. I even have the return flight booked for a week later, because I was medically restricted from flying immediately after the surgery." Thomas leaned over the desk, staring at the brightly lit screen. He read the dates. He read the hospital location. He read the surgical codes. He sat back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. "Jenna," he said softly, the tone of his voice completely changing the atmosphere of the room. "This is no longer a messy civil dispute over a family misunderstanding. What you have just shown me is a fatal flaw in their entire conspiracy." I looked at him, feeling a terrifying sense of power blooming inside my chest. "What does this mean legally?" "It means it is physically, legally, and medically impossible for you to have executed that power of attorney." Thomas explained, his words clipping together with rapid-fire precision. "Your parents did not just forge your name. They completely bungled the timeline. They clearly just picked a random date in the past to make the document look like it had been sitting in a drawer for a while, completely forgetting that you were out of town facing a medical emergency." Thomas stood up and began pacing behind his desk. The energy in the room was electric. He was no longer just a hired attorney. He was an executioner mapping out the gallows. "By transferring your trust funds across state lines based on a forged document," he continued, "they have committed wire fraud. By using your social security number and personal details to convince the bank to release those funds, they have committed aggravated identity theft. And Susan Miller, by applying her official state notary seal to a document she knew you were not present to sign, has committed severe notary fraud and conspiracy. because the amount exceeds $500,000, and because the bank transferred funds electronically, this crosses the threshold into major federal crimes. Federal crimes, I repeated, letting the weight of those two words sink deeply into my bones. Yes, Thomas said, stopping his pacing and looking at me. Your parents thought they were cleverly outsmarting a naive daughter. Instead, they handed you the absolute undeniable proof required to secure a massive felony indictment. There is no gray area here. There is no he said, she said defense. The hospital records are an impenetrable alibi. When the authorities see this, your parents will not be negotiating a repayment plan. They will be facing mandatory minimum prison sentences. I sat back in my chair and looked out the massive windows at the gray city skyline. My parents had told me I would be completely ruined if I fought back. They had threatened to destroy my reputation in their perfect suburban community. They thought their social standing and their loud, aggressive posturing would force me to surrender my future so Cassidy could have her luxury wedding. While I was lying alone in a hospital bed in Denver, crying from surgical pain and feeling completely abandoned because my parents said it was too expensive to fly out and comfort me, they were sitting in Susan Miller's living room practicing my signature. They were literally stealing my grandfather's money while my body was being cut open. The sheer unfathomable cruelty of it erased any lingering shred of familial obligation I might have subconsciously held onto. Mr. Sterling, I said, turning away from the window and meeting his sharp gaze. I do not want to warn them. I do not want to send them a polite legal demand letter asking for the money back. I want to build a cage so tight they cannot possibly breathe their way out of it. Thomas sat back down at his desk. He reached for a fresh legal pad and a new pen. He looked at me with profound professional admiration. We are not going to warn them, Jenna. He promised, his pen hovering over the paper. We are going to let them keep planning that lavish wedding. We are going to let them spend money they do not actually have. And while they are picking out floral arrangements, we are going to take this directly to the Financial Crimes Division. We are going to freeze every single asset attached to their names. We are going to burn their illusion to the ground. I nodded, feeling a cold, righteous fire burning in my soul. Let us go to the police. The ride home from the law office felt completely different than any drive I had ever taken. I was no longer a victim fleeing a crime scene. I was a professional auditor executing a calculated strategy. My first objective was simple but devastatingly effective. I had to sever the financial lifelines I had maintained for 6 exhausting years. I was not going to announce my departure or demand immediate repayment. I was going to let them hang themselves with their own arrogance. I walked into my modest apartment, sat at my small kitchen table, and opened my laptop. For over half a decade, the 15th of every month had been a source of deep anxiety. That was the day my hard-earned paycheck was automatically divided and sent directly to my parents to appease their creditors. I navigated to my primary banking portal and clicked on the Scheduled Transfers tab. There they were, the heavy mortgage payment for their 4-bedroom colonial home, the massive premium for their gold-tier health insurance plan, the automatic drafts for their electric, water, and gas bills. Every single luxury they enjoyed was subsidized by my quiet, invisible labor. I hovered my cursor over the first recurring payment. A small confirmation box popped up on the screen asking if I was sure I wanted to terminate the transfer. I clicked yes. I did it again for the insurance. Yes. I did it for the utilities. Yes. In less than 3 minutes, I systematically dismantled the financial safety net my parents had completely taken for granted. They were so consumed with planning Cassidy's extravagant wedding, so drunk on the $680,000 they had stolen from my grandfather's trust, that they were not paying attention to their own baseline expenses. They assumed I would just keep quietly paying their bills out of habit and suburban guilt. They had no idea that while they were busy tasting imported caviar and selecting silk napkins, their mortgage was quietly slipping into a 30-day delinquency. Their health insurance was entering a perilous grace period. I went entirely dark. I stopped answering their occasional condescending text messages about wedding dress fittings. I let their demanding phone calls go straight to voicemail. I was building a fortress of absolute silence around myself, so they could not sense the impending collapse of their illusion. Over the next 72 hours, my attorney Thomas and I operated with ruthless efficiency. We did not just need a working theory of the crime. We needed an impenetrable paper trail. Since I was the legal and rightful beneficiary of the plundered trust, Thomas utilized his aggressive legal channels to track exactly where the bank had wired the funds after my father executed the fraudulent withdrawal. We sat in his downtown corner office surrounded by stacks of official financial statements, mapping the exact flow of my stolen future. The money had not simply been parked in a quiet savings account for a rainy day. It had been aggressively and joyfully dispersed. Thomas handed me a highlighted ledger, and the sheer audacity of their spending made my stomach turn. My late grandfather had worked his entire life in a local steel mill, saving every extra dollar, sacrificing his own comfort to ensure I would have a stable financial foundation. And here was the itemized proof of how his hard-earned legacy was being squandered. My father had wired $45,000 to clear a series of reckless business debts he had intentionally hidden from everyone. The rest of the money was flowing directly into the luxury wedding industry. $20,000 went to an elite lakeside country club to secure a venue deposit. $12,000 went to a boutique bridal shop for Cassidy's custom gown. $8,000 went to a luxury florist who specialized in imported orchids. My parents were literally purchasing a high society identity, using my stolen social security number and a forged signature. Every single receipt was a vicious slap in the face, but it was also a vital piece of evidence. We compiled everything into a massive, heavy black 3-ring binder. It contained the original trust documents, the forged power of attorney, the routing numbers tracking the stolen money directly to the wedding vendors, and the undeniable crown jewel of our case. We included my certified medical records from Denver General Hospital, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was 1,000 miles away recovering from emergency surgery on the exact day Susan Miller claimed to have notarized my signature in a suburban living room. This binder was not just a collection of papers. It was a loaded weapon, and it was time to hand it over to the authorities. On a rainy Thursday morning, I did not drive to my corporate office. I drove to the local police precinct. The building was stark gray and imposing. It was a complete contrast to the plush, quiet elegance of the bank where this nightmare had originally started. I walked through the heavy metal doors, approached the thick, bulletproof glass of the front desk, and stated clearly that I needed to report a 6-figure identity theft and wire fraud case involving multiple perpetrators. The desk officer took one look at my calm, unyielding expression and the massive black binder clutched in my arms. He immediately picked up his phone and called for a detective. I was led into a small, windowless interview room deep inside the precinct. The walls were painted a dull beige and the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. A few minutes later, Detective Harrison walked in. He was a veteran investigator in the Financial Crimes Division, a man with tired eyes and a demeanor that suggested he had seen every variation of human greed imaginable. He sat down across the metal table from me, opened a worn notepad, and asked me to start from the very beginning. I did not cry. I did not focus on the emotional betrayal or how much it hurt that my own mother had discarded me for the sake of a country club party. I spoke to him the same way I speak to hostile insurance adjusters. I laid out the objective facts, the dates, the jurisdictions, and the exact dollar amounts. I opened the black binder and walked him through the timeline with clinical precision. I handed him the copy of the forged power of attorney. I watched his tired eyes scan the dense legal text noting the forged signature and the fraudulent notary seal. Then I slid the certified hospital records across the metal table. I watched Detective Harrison carefully compare the dates. I watched his posture dramatically shift. The routine, slightly bored expression of a busy police officer vanished completely. He sat up straight, his eyes darting from the hospital discharge summary to the notary stamp and back again. "You were in an operating room in Colorado on the exact day this notary claims you were sitting in her office in this jurisdiction," he asked, his voice sharp with sudden intense focus. "Yes, detective," I replied smoothly. I was under general anesthesia when my father allegedly watched me sign away $680,000. Furthermore, I have the corresponding routing numbers showing those stolen funds are currently being used to pay commercial vendors for my sister's upcoming wedding at the local country club. The theft is not just a past event. The theft is actively ongoing. Detective Harrison leaned back in his metal chair and let out a long, low whistle. He looked at the mountain of pristine, meticulously organized evidence sitting between us. In his line of work, he likely spent months trying to subpoena basic records and build coherent timelines for sloppy financial crimes. I had just handed him a fully assembled gift-wrapped felony conviction. He closed the black binder and folded his hands carefully on top of it. He looked at me with a profound, heavy seriousness. He wanted to ensure I fully understood the gravity of the legal machinery I was about to set into motion. "Miss Harper," he began, slowly weighing every single word, "I need to be absolutely clear with you before we take the next official step. Family disputes over money happen all the time, and usually people just want us to scare their relatives into paying them back. But what you have documented here goes far beyond a civil family dispute. This is grand larceny. This is wire fraud. This is a severe case of notary fraud. If I officially open this investigation based on this evidence, it leaves your hands entirely. You cannot simply change your mind next week if you start to feel bad for them." He leaned closer across the table, forcing me to meet his unwavering gaze. "If we proceed, warrants will be issued. Subpoenas will be served to the bank and to all of these wedding vendors. Your father, your mother, and this notary will be facing multiple felony charges. They will be arrested. They are looking at real significant prison time. Are you absolutely certain you want to initiate a criminal investigation against your own parents?" The small interview room became completely silent. The muffled hum of the busy precinct outside the door seemed to fade into absolute nothingness. This was the ultimate point of no return. If I said yes, I was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. I was officially blowing up my family. I pictured my father's smug face in the dining room, confidently threatening to ruin my reputation if I dared to expose his theft. I pictured my mother's casual cruelty justifying the theft of my grandfather's legacy because she felt she was owed a glamorous lifestyle. I pictured Cassidy sipping imported wine and complaining about the catering, utterly oblivious to the fact that her perfect high society wedding was built entirely on my stolen future. They had never hesitated to sacrifice me. They had never lost a single moment of sleep over the fact that they were robbing me blind. They felt completely entitled to destroy my life, assuming my lifelong craving for their approval would keep me forever silent and compliant. I looked Detective Harrison straight in the eyes. I did not blink. I did not flinch. They stopped being my parents the moment they forged my name. I said, my voice steady and resolute. "Print the formal report, Detective. I am ready to sign it." He held my gaze for a moment longer, searching for any lingering trace of hesitation or doubt. Finding absolutely none, he nodded once, a gesture of quiet professional respect. He stood up, picked up the heavy black binder, and walked out of the room to prepare the official paperwork. I sat alone in that windowless interview room, staring at the blank metal table. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of liberation wash over my entire body. For 32 years, I had carried the suffocating weight of my family's expectations, their debts, and their endless selfish demands. But as I picked up the pen to sign the criminal complaint, I realized I was finally putting that massive burden down. The secret criminal investigation was officially active. The trap was set in motion. My parents were busy preparing for the social event of the season, completely unaware that a federal storm was gathering directly above their heads, and I was the one who had brought the thunder. Thomas Sterling sat back in his heavy leather chair and folded his hands across his pristine glass desk. We had the formal police report officially filed, and the criminal investigation was quietly gathering steam within the financial crimes unit. But Thomas knew exactly how easily white-collar cases could slip away if the targets were tipped off prematurely. He looked at me with the kind of intense, calculating focus usually reserved for a brutal courtroom cross-examination. If your parents catch even a slight whisper that the authorities are involved, Thomas warned that money will vanish overnight. They will panic. They will wire the remaining trust funds into untraceable offshore accounts, or they will bury it in cryptocurrency before a judge can even sign the asset freeze warrants. White-collar criminals always have a backup plan when cornered. We need them completely relaxed. We need them arrogant. You have to make them believe they won. I stared at the heavy mahogany wood of his desk. The thought of apologizing to the people who had forged my name and stolen my grandfather's legacy made my stomach violently churn. It went against every single moral fiber in my body. But Thomas was absolutely right. In the complex world of medical billing, when you suspect a massive provider of systemic fraud, you do not send them an angry letter demanding a refund. You smile, you request routine documentation, and you quietly gather your evidence while they think you are just a clueless clerk. I had to become the ultimate Trojan horse in my own family. That evening, I sat on my faded living room couch staring at my phone for a long time. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to slow down. I needed to channel every ounce of the weak approval-seeking daughter I used to be. I needed to give the performance of a lifetime. I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice dripping with a chilly practiced distance. "Yes, Jenna," she answered. I squeezed my eyes shut and forced a deliberate tremor into my voice. "Mom," I said, letting out a carefully measured, shaky breath. "I am so sorry." The silence on the line was heavy thick with her silent demand for my total surrender. I was just so shocked by the bank manager I continued forcing myself to sound small and defeated. I completely panicked. "But I know you and Dad were in a terrible financial bind. I know Cassidy's wedding is the most important thing right now. You were right. Family comes first. I was being selfish and I just cannot bear the thought of losing you all over money. Please, I just want to be a part of my sister's perfect season." I could practically hear the smug satisfaction radiating through the cellular signal. My mother let out a long, theatrical sigh. It was the exact sound of a benevolent monarch offering unearned mercy to a disobedient peasant. "Well," Jenna Patricia said smoothly, "your father and I were deeply hurt by your aggressive little outburst yesterday. But we are Christians. We believe in forgiveness. We knew you would eventually come to your senses and realize everything we do is for the greater good of this family. You can come over tomorrow morning. Cassidy desperately needs help with the reception favors, and frankly, you owe us a great deal of effort to make up for your terrible behavior." Walking back into my parents' 4-bedroom colonial the next morning was the most surreal experience of my life. The house still smelled of expensive vanilla candles and fresh entitlement. My father was sitting in his usual armchair reading a business journal. When I walked into the living room, he did not get up to hug me. He simply offered a tight, patronizing smirk. "Glad to see you finally decided to act like an adult," Jenna Roberts said, not even bothering to look up from his reading. "We will discuss a small repayment schedule for your trust next year once the wedding dust settles and my investments mature. Just keep your head down and help your sister." I swallowed the burning bile in my throat and nodded meekly. Cassidy did not even pretend to offer grace. She treated my return as the arrival of an unpaid intern. She was lounging on the plush sofa surrounded by towering boxes of expensive wedding materials. She shoved a massive plastic bin toward my feet. "Since you almost ruined my entire vibe yesterday," she snapped, handing me a pair of scissors and a giant spool of silver silk ribbon. "You are going to assemble all 250 guest favor boxes. The candied almonds need to be placed perfectly in the center, and the ribbon has to be tied in a precise double loop. If you mess them up, you are paying to replace them. Oh, and my dry cleaning is ready downtown. You need to pick that up before noon and do not put the bags in your dirty back seat." For 3 excruciating days, I played the role of the broken, subservient scapegoat. I sat on the floor of their pristine living room for hours, my fingers blistering as I tied hundreds of tiny silver ribbons around expensive candied almonds. I fetched gourmet coffee. I polished the antique silver serving trays my mother demanded we use for the rehearsal dinner. I drove across town in heavy traffic to pick up dry cleaning, listening to my sister complain on speakerphone about how exhausted she was from tasting wedding cakes. They gloated openly. They made condescending jokes about my cheap clothes and my beat-up sedan, utterly convinced they had successfully beaten me back into submission. I listened to Patricia brag on the phone to her country club friends about the imported orchids they had secured for the centerpieces, openly using my stolen inheritance to buy her way into the local high society. Every time Cassidy barked an order at me, every time my father threw a dismissive comment my way, I just kept my head bowed and said yes. They felt completely safe, and that was exactly what I needed. On Thursday afternoon, the perfect opportunity finally presented itself. Cassidy and Patricia were having a massive meltdown in the kitchen over a perceived flaw in the ivory table linens. They were screaming at a poor catering manager on speakerphone, completely absorbed in their own manufactured drama. My father had left the house to play a round of golf with Bryce Kensington's father, further cementing his fake status as a wealthy patriarch. I was supposed to be in the formal dining room, sorting hand-calligraphed response cards. Instead, I slipped silently down the hallway and turned the heavy brass knob of my father's home office. The door clicked shut behind me, plunging me into the quiet sanctuary of his private world. The office was meticulously organized, a desperate testament to Robert's need to appear successful. I moved with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned auditor. I did not rummage. I did not disturb the exact placement of his pens or his expensive leather coasters. I knew exactly what I was looking for. People who steal large sums of money rarely rely entirely on digital records. They like to hold the physical proof of their newfound wealth in their hands. They print things out. They want to see the numbers on paper. I approached the heavy wooden filing cabinet tucked into the corner of the room. I opened the bottom drawer. It was locked, but Robert was a creature of incredibly lazy habits. He always kept the small silver spare key taped to the underside of his desk lamp. I ran my fingers under the cool metal base, felt the familiar shape of the key, and peeled it free. I slipped it into the lock and pulled the heavy drawer open. Inside were thick manila folders, labeled with recent dates and financial institution names. I pulled the first one, my heart maintaining a steady, icy rhythm. It was a fresh bank statement from a premier private wealth management firm. The account holder name was Robert James Harper. The balance was absolutely staggering, $412,000. I pulled my phone from my pocket, silenced the camera shutter sound, and began taking high-resolution photographs of every single page. I captured the account numbers, the routing codes, and the itemized transaction history. The ledger told a complete, devastating story. I could see the exact date the massive wire transfer had hit this account from my liquidated trust fund. I could see the subsequent outbound transfers. $50,000 routed to a luxury travel agency for Cassidy's upcoming honeymoon in Bora Bora. $30,000 wired to a high-end auto dealership to pay off the remaining loan on Robert's luxury SUV. I moved swiftly to the next folder. It contained documents for a newly opened high-yield savings account in Patricia's name, holding another $100,000 of my stolen future. I photographed the account details, the signature cards, and the initial deposit slips. I found a third folder containing an aggressive investment portfolio that Robert had just opened, gambling with my grandfather's legacy in high-risk tech stocks, completely convinced he was a financial genius. I captured 42 crystal-clear images in less than 8 minutes. I documented every single location where my stolen trust had been stashed, completely neutralizing their ability to hide the funds from the impending police warrants. I had the account numbers. I had the balances. I had the undeniable proof of where every single penny was currently resting. I placed the folders exactly as I had found them. I locked the filing cabinet, replaced the key securely under the desk lamp, and wiped the drawer handle with my sleeve to remove any fingerprints. As I slipped back out into the hallway, I could still hear my mother yelling at the caterer in the kitchen about the specific thread count of the cocktail napkins. She was threatening to ruin the caterer's reputation in town if the linens were not replaced by tomorrow. I walked back into the dining room, sat down at the table, and quietly went back to sorting the elegant wedding response cards. I pulled my phone out under the table and opened my secure messaging app. I attached the 42 photographs and hit send, routing the entire financial map directly to Thomas Sterling. My phone buzzed in my hand 3 minutes later. It was a text from Thomas. "We have them," the message read. "The Financial Crimes Unit is fully briefed. Asset freeze warrants will be requested tomorrow morning." I looked down at the pile of silver ribbons and expensive cardstock sitting in front of me. For 6 years, I had believed that being a good daughter meant sacrificing my own well-being to keep my family afloat. I had let them drain my energy, my youth, and my bank account, completely convinced that one day they would look at me and finally recognize my worth. But looking at the undeniable proof of their greed, I finally understood the truth. They were never going to change, and they were never going to stop taking until I had absolutely nothing left to give. I smiled. A genuine, bright, dangerous smile that I hid carefully behind a stack of wedding invitations. My parents were absolutely right about one thing. Family comes first. And I was about to be the first person to make sure they faced the devastating consequences of their own actions. The morning after I sent those photographs from my father's locked filing cabinet, the full weight of the justice system began to move with terrifying speed. When you are dealing with petty theft or minor disputes, the legal process can drag on for months or even years. But when you hand a seasoned financial crimes detective and a ruthless forensic attorney absolute, undeniable proof of a 6-figure wire fraud, the machinery of the law operates like a well-oiled engine. While my mother was busy arguing with a local baker over the exact shade of ivory frosting for my sister's extravagant wedding cake, my attorney Thomas Sterling was standing in front of a county judge. He presented the forged power of attorney. He presented the certified medical records proving I was undergoing emergency surgery in a Colorado hospital on the exact day that document was supposedly signed in a suburban living room. And finally, he presented the 42 high-resolution photographs I had taken of my father's hidden financial ledgers, mapping exactly where my stolen trust fund had been moved. The judge did not hesitate. Within hours, emergency warrants were issued. But Thomas did not stop at the criminal level. He filed an immediate ex parte civil injunction to freeze every single financial asset attached to Robert and Patricia Harper. An ex parte motion means my parents were not notified about the hearing. They were not given a chance to defend themselves or hide the money. The judge signed the order, and the directives were transmitted directly to the private wealth management firms and commercial banks where my father had arrogantly stashed my grandfather's legacy. The trap had been completely set, and the steel jaws were ready to snap shut. I went to work that day and sat at my desk processing medical billing claims with a surreal sense of calm. My phone sat quietly next to my keyboard. I knew it was only a matter of time before the shockwave hit the suburbs. For the next 2 days, I continued to play my part flawlessly. I visited my parents' home every evening after work, stepping back into the role of the subservient, invisible daughter. The atmosphere in their colonial house was completely intoxicating to them. They were drunk on their newly stolen wealth. Cassidy was floating through the hallways like royalty, wearing expensive silk loungewear she had purchased just for her wedding prep week. She handed me endless, humiliating tasks. I steamed her delicate rehearsal dinner dress. I spent 3 hours sitting on the living room floor, tying perfectly symmetrical bows around 200 customized champagne flutes for the guest favors. Every time I tied a knot, I listened to my parents boast. Robert stood in the kitchen loudly talking on his cell phone to his golf buddies about the aggressive new tech stocks he had just invested in. He was using my money to play the role of a brilliant day trader. Patricia was pacing the hardwood floors, calling luxury vendors to add last-minute upgrades to the reception. She upgraded the floral centerpieces to include rare imported lilies. She added a premium raw seafood bar to the cocktail hour. She was throwing my stolen money around with absolute reckless abandon, desperately trying to impress Bryce Kensington's wealthy real estate family. They truly believed they were untouchable. They thought they had successfully bullied me into submission, convinced that my tearful apology over the phone meant I had accepted my place as their financial sacrifice. They looked at me sitting on their floor, working like an unpaid servant, and felt nothing but smug satisfaction. They did not see a threat. They saw a defeated victim. They had no idea that their entire world was already a ghost ship. The money they were so casually spending was already locked inside a federal vault. The breaking point finally arrived on Wednesday afternoon, exactly 3 days before Cassidy's lavish high society rehearsal dinner. I was at my office reviewing a complex insurance denial when my cell phone vibrated across my desk. The screen illuminated with a text message from my mother. The preview text was frantic, filled with exclamation points and capital letters. I picked up the phone and opened the message. "Jenna, call me right now. The bank systems are completely down and our cards are declining everywhere. It is an absolute disaster." I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair and let out a long, deeply satisfied breath. I read the text message again, savoring every single word. The bank systems were not down. The global financial network was perfectly fine. Their cards were declining because the federal asset freeze had officially taken effect. Every single account bearing the name Robert or Patricia Harper had been locked down by a judge's order. The money was still there, but they could not touch a single dime of it. I waited exactly 10 minutes before returning the call. I needed to let her panic simmer just a little bit longer. When I finally dialed her number, she answered on the first ring. "Mom, is everything okay?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound breathless and full of daughterly concern. "I just saw your text message. What is going on?" "It is an absolute nightmare," Patricia practically screamed into the receiver. "I am standing in the middle of the luxury bridal boutique downtown. I just tried to pay the final $10,000 balance for Cassidy's custom reception gown, and my platinum card declined. The cashier tried it 3 times. It was incredibly humiliating. Several of Bryce's family friends were in the store, and they absolutely saw the whole thing happen." "Oh my goodness," I said, pressing a hand over my mouth to stifle a very real laugh. "Did you try a different card?" "Of course I tried a different card," she snapped, her voice trembling with misplaced rage. "I tried the gold card. I tried your father's business account card. Every single one of them declined." The little girl behind the register actually had the nerve to look at me with pity. I immediately called the bank's premium customer service line to demand an explanation. "What did they say?" I asked, leaning closer to the phone. Patricia let out a sound of pure, unadulterated frustration. "They were completely useless. The representative told me there was a mandatory administrative hold on the accounts and he could not override it. He said I have to speak directly with their Central Fraud and Compliance Division, but those people are apparently in a mandatory training seminar and cannot take calls until tomorrow. It is obviously a massive system error on their end. These incompetent corporate banks simply do not know how to handle high net worth clients." High net worth clients. The sheer delusion of her statement was almost staggering. She was standing in a bridal shop trying to buy a dress with money she had actively stolen from my grandfather's trust, and she genuinely believed she was a victim of bad customer service. "I am so sorry, Mom," I murmured, keeping my tone perfectly sympathetic. "That sounds incredibly stressful right before the rehearsal dinner. What did Dad say about all of this?" "Your father is absolutely furious," she replied, the sound of her heavy footsteps echoing through the phone as she presumably paced around the boutique parking lot. "He tried to log into the private wealth management portal to wire the money directly, but he cannot even get past the login screen. It just keeps giving him an access denied error. He is going to march down to the main branch first thing on Monday morning and threaten to pull all of our investments if they do not fix this immediately." I closed my eyes and smiled at the ceiling of my office. Access denied. It was the exact same bright red error message I had seen on my own banking app just a few weeks ago. The poetry of the situation was absolutely exquisite. The universe was handing them the exact same terror they had so casually inflicted upon me. "But Mom, what are you going to do about the wedding vendors?" I asked, playing the role of the anxious helper. "The rehearsal dinner is in 3 days. Do you need to cancel the country club reservation or scale back the menu until the bank fixes the system error?" "Cancel it," Patricia gasped, sounding genuinely horrified by the mere suggestion. "Jenna, are you out of your mind? We are hosting the Kensington family. Bryce's parents have invited the mayor, 2 city councilmen, and half the local country club board of directors. We absolutely cannot cancel or scale back anything. If we change the menu now, we will look like absolute fools. We will look like we cannot afford to host them properly. But if your cards are not working, how are you paying for it all?" I pressed, gently guiding her deeper into her own trap. "We will just issue paper checks for the remaining balances," she declared confidently. "The vendors all know your father. They respect our family name in this community. They will gladly accept a paper check, and by the time those checks actually process and clear the banking system early next week, your father will have marched into the bank and forced them to fix this ridiculous computer glitch. It is just a temporary cash flow hiccup. We just have to project absolute confidence and pretend everything is perfectly fine until Monday." I sat in my quiet office, completely stunned by the sheer magnitude of their pride. Instead of pausing to investigate why every single financial asset they possessed was suddenly locked, they were choosing to double down on the illusion. They were so terrified of looking poor in front of Cassidy's wealthy future in-laws that they were willing to write tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent paper checks. They were willingly writing checks from accounts they could not access, adding another layer of financial deception to their already massive pile of federal crimes. They were digging their own graves, and they were using a gold-plated shovel to do it. "Okay, Mom," I said softly. "You are right. You and Dad always know exactly how to handle things. Just stay confident. I am sure everything will be completely resolved very soon. I will see you at the house tonight, Jenna," she said, her tone returning to its usual demanding sharpness. "I need you to steam the silk tablecloths for the sweetheart table. And do not be late." I hung up the phone and placed it gently on my desk. I looked out the window at the busy city street below. My parents were marching blindly toward the edge of a massive cliff, totally convinced they were simply walking down a red carpet. They truly believed that come Monday morning, my father would walk into his bank, throw his weight around, yell at a branch manager, and magically regain access to the $680,000 he had stolen from me. They had absolutely no idea that Monday morning would not bring a banking resolution. Monday morning would bring a formal indictment. But even better than that, the rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Saturday night. They were going to host the wealthiest families in our county. They were going to pour expensive champagne, eat imported crab cakes, and give arrogant toasts about their success. They were going to stand at the absolute pinnacle of the high society mountain they had climbed using my stolen money, and I was going to be the one to push them off. I picked up my office phone and dialed Thomas Sterling's direct line. He answered immediately. "The accounts are fully locked," I told him, keeping my voice steady. "My mother just called me in a complete panic. They think it is a temporary banking error. They are planning to write paper checks to float the rest of the wedding expenses through the weekend." Thomas let out a low, appreciative chuckle. "The arrogance of the amateur criminal never ceases to amaze me," he said smoothly. "They are actively compounding their charges. Writing bad checks over a certain dollar amount is a felony on its own." "Are the police warrants ready?" I asked, feeling my pulse quicken with a cold, sharp anticipation. "Detective Harrison confirmed the warrants were signed by the judge an hour ago," Thomas replied. "The Financial Crimes Unit is fully briefed. They have the authority to make the arrests at any time." I looked at the calendar on my desk. Saturday was marked with a bright pink circle for Cassidy's rehearsal dinner. It was supposed to be the crowning achievement of my parents' fraudulent lives. "Tell the detective to wait until Saturday night," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the quiet office. "I want them to be at the country club. I want them to be surrounded by every single person they were trying to impress." Thomas paused for a moment, and I could hear the smile in his voice when he finally spoke. "It is highly unorthodox to coordinate an arrest with a social calendar, Jenna. But given the absolute severity of the fraud, and the fact that they are actively writing bad checks to a major commercial venue, the police will likely want to intercept them at the country club anyway, to prevent further financial damage to the vendors. I will make the call." I thanked him and hung up the phone. I spent the rest of my afternoon finishing my billing reports with a light, peaceful heart. For 6 years, I had dreaded family events. I had dreaded the condescending remarks, the constant demands for money, and the suffocating feeling that I was nothing more than an invisible wallet. But as I packed up my briefcase and prepared to drive to the suburbs, to steam my sister's silk tablecloths, I realized something incredible. I was actually looking forward to the rehearsal dinner. I was finally going to attend a family function where I held absolutely all the power. The trap was locked, the stage was set, and the curtain was about to rise on the greatest reckoning my family had ever seen. The Oak Ridge Valley Country Club represented the absolute pinnacle of local high society. Valets in crisp white shirts hurried to park a steady stream of luxury vehicles under the massive stone portico. Inside the grand ballroom, a live jazz quartet played a soft, sophisticated melody in the corner. Enormous crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over 30 round tables, each draped in imported silk linens. Waiters in tailored uniforms circulated through the crowd with silver trays offering expensive caviar appetizers and glasses of artisanal champagne. This was the rehearsal dinner for Cassidy Harper and Bryce Kensington. It was an event meticulously designed by my parents to solidify our family's fabricated status among the wealthy suburban elite. William and Cynthia Kensington sat at the center of the head table. They were old money. They valued reputation, connections, and public standing above all else. They truly believed they were merging their prestigious real estate dynasty with another highly successful, respectable family. My parents, Robert and Patricia, were playing their parts flawlessly. My father stood near the private mahogany bar, holding a heavy glass of top-shelf bourbon. He was laughing loudly, confidently discussing fake commercial investment strategies with Bryce's prominent uncles. My mother floated gracefully between the tables in a stunning designer gown. She was smiling perfectly on cue, accepting gushing compliments on the lavish floral centerpieces she had demanded just 3 days ago. These were centerpieces she had paid for with a fraudulent paper check, fully aware that her bank accounts had been locked by a federal judge. I did not enter the country club through the discreet side doors. I did not slip quietly into the back of the room like the obedient, invisible scapegoat they fully expected me to be. I walked right through the main double doors of the grand ballroom. I was supposed to be wearing a hideous, ill-fitting pastel pink bridesmaid dress that my mother had specifically chosen to make me look completely washed out and entirely forgettable. Instead, I wore a sharply tailored deep emerald green power suit. My hair was styled elegantly. I wore the subtle, confident makeup of a professional woman who knew exactly what she was about to do. I did not look like a tired medical billing specialist who had spent 6 years eating generic ramen to pay her parents' utility bills. I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall near the entrance. I looked like a reckoning. A few heads turned as my low heels clicked against the polished marble floor of the entryway. People who only knew me as the quiet, frumpy older sister stared in genuine confusion. The atmosphere around the entrance shifted as I stepped onto the plush dining room carpet. Cassidy was standing near the towering tiered wedding cake display, holding tightly to Bryce's arm. She spotted me immediately. Her perfect, highly practiced bridal smile instantly dissolved into a hard scowl of sheer, unadulterated entitlement. She whispered something quickly to Bryce, dropped his arm, and started marching across the crowded room toward me. I knew exactly what she was going to say. She was going to demand to know why I was not wearing the assigned ugly dress. She was going to tell me to go back to the kitchen and check on the catering staff because I was embarrassing her. I did not give my sister the chance to speak a single word. I walked straight past her without making eye contact, brushing my shoulder past her designer gown. I moved through the sea of wealthy, connected guests with steady, measured steps. My heart was not racing. My palms were not sweating. After a lifetime of walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting my toxic family, the absolute, undeniable certainty of the truth grounded me completely. I reached the raised platform at the front of the room, right next to the head table where the Kensingtons were seated. My father finally noticed me. His arrogant, booming laugh faltered for a fraction of a second. He took a heavy step forward, setting his bourbon glass down, clearly intending to quietly escort me into the hallway and threaten my reputation again. My mother's eyes widened in sudden creeping horror as she realized I was not walking toward an empty seat. I was walking toward the microphone stand set up for the evening toasts. I did not wait for my father to reach me. I picked up a heavy silver spoon from the nearest place setting. I picked up an empty crystal champagne flute. I tapped the spoon against the delicate glass. The sharp, clear ringing sound pierced directly through the low murmur of wealthy conversation and the soft jazz music. I tapped it again, louder this time. The music abruptly stopped. 150 elegantly dressed guests turned their collective attention toward the front of the room. The silence that fell over the grand ballroom was absolute, heavy, and deeply suffocating. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice projected effortlessly across the room, amplified by the sound system. It carried no anger, no hysteria, and no desperate tears. It was the exact tone I used when dismantling a fraudulent insurance denial. For those who do not know me, my name is Jenna Harper. I am Cassidy's older sister. William and Cynthia Kensington offered me polite, expectant smiles, assuming I was simply a nervous sister about to deliver a heartwarming family tribute. My mother, however, recognized the cold precision in my voice. The remaining color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking physically ill. She took a frantic, stumbling step toward the platform. "Robert, Patricia, I suggest you stay exactly where you are," I commanded, keeping my voice dangerously calm but loud enough for every single guest to hear. My father froze in his tracks. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly sensing the drastic, terrifying shift in the atmosphere. The polite smiles vanished from the Kensingtons' faces. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate a union of two families," I continued, turning slightly to look directly at Bryce's parents. "The Kensington family has built a wonderful, highly respected legacy in this community. You value honesty, integrity, and hard work above all else. Therefore, I believe you have the absolute right to know exactly who you are sitting across from this evening." I looked back out over the crowd, making deliberate eye contact with the confused faces of the country club elite. My parents, Robert and Patricia Harper, have spent the last few months projecting the flawless image of a wealthy, successful couple, I said, letting the words echo through the quiet room. They have hosted you at expensive dinners. They have boasted loudly about their stock portfolios. They have presented themselves as your financial and social equals. It is all a complete, meticulously fabricated illusion. My parents are absolutely broke. A collective audible gasp rippled through the ballroom. Cassidy let out a sharp, high-pitched cry of outrage from the back of the room. Bryce looked utterly bewildered, staring at his beautiful fiancée as if she were a stranger. "Jenna, shut your mouth right now," my father barked. His face turned a violent shade of crimson as the humiliation hit him. He lunged toward the platform, abandoning any pretense of suburban charm. "You are having a mental breakdown. Someone call security and get her out of here right now." I did not flinch. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out the thick, heavy black binder I had compiled with my attorney. I held it up high for the entire room to see. "I am not having a breakdown, Robert," I said, intentionally dropping the title of father completely. "I am simply providing an audit." I opened the binder and rested it on the podium. "The food you are eating tonight, the expensive imported flowers on your tables, the custom bridal gown and the massive deposit for this very venue were not paid for by my father's successful business. For the past 6 years, my father's contracting business has been entirely insolvent. For 6 years, I have personally paid their mortgage, their utility bills, and their health insurance premiums out of my own modest salary just to keep a roof over their heads." More murmurs of shock spread through the crowd. Cynthia Kensington put a trembling hand over her mouth. "But my meager paycheck was not enough to fund this lavish high society wedding," I continued, my voice ringing with icy authority. "So 3 weeks ago, my parents decided to upgrade their financial abuse. They bypassed my checking account and went straight for the trust fund left to me by my late grandfather, a trust fund containing $680,000. Patricia let out a loud, theatrical sob, desperately attempting to play the victim in front of her peers. "She is lying," Patricia wailed to the crowd, grabbing the edge of a table for support. She is a sick, deeply jealous girl making up horrible stories to ruin her sister's happiness. I pulled a stack of legally certified documents from the binder. I am a medical billing specialist. I told the room, my voice easily cutting through my mother's fake crying. I track fraudulent claims and financial discrepancies for a living. I do not make public accusations without absolute undeniable proof. I held up the first document. 3 weeks ago, my father walked into a major financial institution and presented a durable power of attorney. This document granted him total unrestricted control over my personal finances. It contained my signature granting him the authority to bypass the legal age lock on my trust and wire the entirety of my inheritance directly into his own private accounts. I turned my head to look at a specific table near the middle of the room. Susan Miller, my mother's best friend from their church committee, was sitting there. She was clutching her linen napkin, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. "The signature on this legal document is a very good forgery," I said, keeping my gaze locked onto Susan, "and the official notary stamp verifying that forged signature belongs to Susan Miller, who is sitting right over there at table number 6. Every single head in the grand ballroom snapped toward Susan. She shrank down in her chair, physically trembling, entirely unable to speak or defend herself against the truth. My parents and Susan made a very arrogant, very sloppy mistake when they committed this felony together, I told the captivated audience. They claimed that I sat in a suburban living room on October 14th of last year and willingly signed away my entire future. I pulled out the next stack of papers and held them up. These are my certified, itemized medical records from Denver General Hospital. On October 14th, the exact day my parents claim I was sitting in their living room signing this legal document, I was 1,000 miles away in the state of Colorado. I was lying in a hospital bed, heavily medicated on intravenous painkillers, recovering from an emergency appendectomy. It is physically, medically, and legally impossible for me to have signed that document. The silence in the country club was now completely absolute. The wealthy guests were no longer just shocked by a family dispute. They were horrified. They were staring at my parents the exact same way you stare at dangerous, brazen criminals. But the fraud does not stop there. I continued looking directly at the venue manager, who was standing near the back doors, his face pale with concern. When the bank notified me of the theft, I did not just cry. I went to a federal financial crimes detective. Yesterday afternoon, a judge signed an emergency order freezing every single bank account attached to Robert and Patricia Harper. The money they stole is locked in a federal vault. They have absolutely zero access to capital. I raised my voice to ensure the catering staff and the club directors heard me clearly. Which means the paper checks my mother handed to the florists, the dressmakers, and this venue over the last 48 hours are completely worthless. They are intentionally writing bad checks from frozen accounts. They are actively defrauding local businesses just to maintain their fake social status for one more night. I gathered the entire stack of documents, including the official stamped police report, and stepped off the platform. I walked directly to the head table and placed the papers gently in front of William and Cynthia Kensington. I believe in full transparency. Before a marriage, I told them softly but loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. You deserve to know that you are not marrying into a successful, respectable family. You are marrying into an active federal investigation. I stepped back and looked at my parents. They were completely broken, stripped of their power, their pride, and their stolen wealth. The illusion was dead. The perfect suburban facade had been completely, permanently incinerated by the truth. The absolute silence in the grand ballroom did not last long. It hung in the air for perhaps 5 agonizing seconds, thick and deeply suffocating, before the reality of my words finally shattered. The polite country club atmosphere. A low murmur started at the back tables, the ones closest to the mahogany bar, and quickly rippled forward like a tidal wave of scandalized whispers. Glasses clinked sharply as they were nervously set down on the pristine silk tablecloths. The live jazz quartet in the corner had completely stopped playing, the musicians staring wide-eyed at the spectacle unfolding on the polished dance floor. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the wooden podium. I watched the meticulously constructed world of Robert and Patricia Harper dissolve into absolute ruin. At the head table, the Kensington family looked as though they had been physically struck. William Kensington, a man whose entire real estate empire relied on an impeccable reputation and unblemished social standing, stared at the stack of certified legal documents I had placed in front of him. His face was a mask of cold, calculating horror. Beside him, Cynthia Kensington looked visibly repulsed. She pulled her designer shawl tighter around her shoulders, physically leaning away from my mother, as if the fraud were a highly contagious disease. They were conservative old money elites who despised public embarrassment above all else, and my parents had just dragged them into the absolute center of a federal financial crime. Bryce Kensington slowly turned his head to look at Cassidy. The bright adoration that had been in his eyes all evening was completely gone, replaced by a chilling, vacant stare. He looked at the custom designer gown she was wearing. He looked at the imported floral arrangements surrounding their table. He looked at the massive diamond engagement ring sparkling on her finger, a ring he had purchased under the false assumption that he was marrying into a family of equal financial stature and moral integrity. The brutal truth was dawning on him in real time. His entire relationship, the lavish lifestyle his fiancée had projected, the arrogant boasting of his future father-in-law, it was all a parasitic illusion funded by the systematic abuse of an older sister. "Bryce, please," Cassidy stammered, her voice pitching into a shrill, panicked whine. Her perfectly manicured hands reached out to grab his tuxedo jacket. "You cannot possibly believe her. Jenna is just jealous. She has always been jealous of me. She is making all of this up to ruin my wedding because she is deeply unhappy with her own miserable life." Bryce did not say a single word. He did not yell, and he did not pull away immediately. He simply looked down at her hands clutching his lapel with an expression of profound disgust. It was the look of a man realizing he was engaged to a complete stranger. My father could not handle the public humiliation. His entire identity was wrapped up in being the smartest, wealthiest, most powerful man in any room. The sight of the Kensington family recoiling from him, the sound of his country club peers whispering about bad checks and federal vaults, it completely broke his fragile, arrogant mind. His face flushed a dark mottled purple, the veins standing out starkly against his neck. "Shut your mouth!" Robert roared, his voice echoing violently off the crystal chandeliers. He lunged across the space separating the head table from the podium, his large hands balled into tight fists. He was no longer trying to maintain the facade of a refined gentleman. He was a desperate, cornered predator. "You ungrateful, malicious little liar. I will drag you out of this club by your hair. I will have you committed to a psychiatric ward. Give me those papers right now." He took another aggressive step toward me, his arm raising as if he meant to physically strike me or rip the black binder from my grasp. Several wealthy guests gasped out loud in shock. A waiter near the front dropped a silver tray of champagne glasses, the shattering crystal completely swallowed by the heavy tension in the room. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I looked my father dead in the eyes and held my ground. For the first time in my 32 years of life, he looked at me and realized I was no longer afraid of him. I was no longer the quiet, compliant girl who would absorb his rage to keep the peace. I was the architect of his destruction, and I welcomed his anger because it only proved my point to every single witness in the room. "You are not going to touch me, Robert," I said, my voice cutting through his screaming with icy authority. "And you are not going to touch these documents. They are already logged into the evidence room at the Financial Crimes Division. What you see here is merely a courtesy copy." Before Robert could close the final few feet between us, the heavy, ornately carved oak doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding crash. The timing was so perfect it almost felt scripted, but it was simply the inevitable, methodical progression of the justice system. Detective Harrison strode into the room, flanked by 3 uniformed police officers. They did not look like they were there to politely ask questions. They moved with absolute, uncompromising purpose. The country club manager trailed nervously behind them, looking completely panicked by the sudden law enforcement presence in his elite establishment. Robert James Harper, Detective Harrison called out, his deep voice slicing through the chaotic murmurs of the crowd. Patricia Ann Harper. My father froze. His aggressive posture immediately collapsed, replaced by a sudden total physical paralysis. He slowly turned his head toward the entrance, his eyes widening in pure terror as he saw the uniforms approaching. My mother let out a sharp, breathless shriek and grabbed the edge of the dining table, her knees literally buckling beneath her expensive designer gown. The officers moved swiftly across the ballroom floor. The wealthy guests parted like the sea, pulling their chairs back and scrambling out of the way to avoid any association with the unfolding criminal arrests. "We have warrants for your arrest," Detective Harrison announced, clearly ensuring the entire room could hear the charges. "You are both being taken into custody on multiple counts of grand theft, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud." "No," Patricia wailed, the sound tearing from her throat in a ragged, hysterical sob. "No, this is a terrible mistake. We are good people. We are prominent members of this community. William, Cynthia, tell them. Tell them who we are. Please do not let them do this to us." She reached out a trembling hand toward the Kensingtons, begging them to use their immense influence to save her. William Kensington slowly stood up from his chair. He looked at my mother with a completely blank, icy expression. He reached down, took his wife gently by the elbow, and turned his back on my parents entirely. The absolute social rejection was far more devastating than a physical blow. Patricia collapsed into a weeping, hysterical mess on the carpet. An officer pulled my father's hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs echoing through the quiet ballroom was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. For 6 long years, my father had used emotional blackmail and financial manipulation to keep me in chains. Now he was wearing a very real, inescapable set of his own. "This is a complete misunderstanding," Robert stammered weakly as the officer tightened the steel cuffs around his wrists. "My daughter is simply confused. We had a verbal agreement regarding the trust fund. We were just restructuring our family assets. I demand to call my private lawyer." "You will have plenty of time to call a public defender from the precinct," Mr. Harper. Detective Harrison replied smoothly, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "But your private accounts are completely frozen by a federal judge, so I would not plan on paying a premium legal retainer anytime soon." 2 more police officers approached Susan Miller at table number 6. The church committee veteran was sitting perfectly still, her face buried deeply in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. They lifted her by her arms, snapping handcuffs over her wrists, loudly informing her she was under arrest for felony notary fraud and criminal conspiracy. The respected pillars of the suburban community were being paraded out of the country club like common thieves, completely stripped of their dignity, their pride, and their stolen wealth. As my parents were escorted down the central aisle of the grand ballroom, Patricia kept looking back at me. Her eyes were filled with a chaotic mixture of absolute hatred and genuine disbelief. She could not comprehend that the quiet, obedient daughter she had casually thrown away had been the one to orchestrate her total downfall. I met her gaze evenly, feeling absolutely no guilt, no remorse, and no sorrow. I simply watched them walk out the heavy oak doors, taking the suffocating weight of my traumatic past with them. Cassidy was left standing entirely alone near the head table. Her perfect season had turned into a spectacular, highly public nightmare. She was trembling violently, her chest heaving as she stared at the empty space where her parents had just been arrested. She slowly turned back to Bryce, thick tears streaming down her face, completely ruining her flawless bridal makeup. "Bryce, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a desperate, hollow whisper. "We can still fix this. We do not need my parents or their money. We can still get married. We can just focus on us. I love you so much. We have the venue booked. The vendors are already paid. We can just move past this terrible mistake and start our lives together." Bryce Kensington looked at her with a cold, unforgiving finality that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. "The vendors are not paid, Cassidy," he said, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or previous affection. Your sister just explained that the checks your mother wrote are totally fraudulent. Your entire life is fraudulent. You sat there complaining to me about $50,000 floral budgets while your sister was working herself to death to pay your parents' electric bill. You are exactly the kind of person my family has spent generations avoiding. He reached into his tailored tuxedo pocket, pulled out a small velvet ring box, and placed it deliberately on the center of the silk tablecloth. "The wedding is canceled," he announced, his voice carrying clearly to the surrounding guests. "Every single event this weekend is canceled. My family will not be associated with a criminal enterprise. Do not ever contact me or my parents again." Bryce turned on his heel and walked away, following his parents steadily toward the exit. He did not look back even once. Cassidy let out a gut-wrenching scream, a loud sound of pure selfish devastation. She dropped to her knees on the cold marble floor, burying her face in her hands, weeping endlessly for the loss of her wealthy fiancé, her prestigious country club wedding, and her unearned social status. The golden child was finally experiencing the harsh consequences of reality, and she was completely unequipped to handle the crushing weight of it. I watched her cry, feeling a profound sense of closure settle deep into my bones. The country club manager approached the platform, looking incredibly stressed, tightly holding a clipboard of unpaid vendor invoices. I packed my certified legal documents neatly back into my leather briefcase, snapped the brass lock shut, and walked calmly past my sobbing sister. I did not offer her a comforting word. I did not stoop down to help her up from the floor. She had made her terrible choices. She had gladly spent my stolen future, and now she had to live in the permanent ruin she had helped create. I walked out of the grand ballroom, out from under the luxurious stone portico, and stepped into the cool, crisp night air. The valet brought my beat-up 12-year-old sedan to the front entrance. I tipped him generous cash, climbed into the driver's seat, and drove away from the elite country club forever. For the first time in my entire adult life, my shoulders felt incredibly light. The crushing, paralyzing anxiety of the 15th of the month was entirely gone. The desperate, exhausting need to earn the love of people who were fundamentally incapable of loving me was completely erased from my mind. I had lost the toxic family I was unfortunately born into, but I had finally found my own incredible, undeniable strength. I had audited the truth, exposed their vicious lies, and successfully reclaimed my entire future. I want to pause right here and ask all of you watching this video a very important question. Have you ever realized that the people who demand your loyalty the loudest are usually the ones completely exploiting you behind your back? Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line to protect your own future and your sanity from the deep toxicity of your own family? If my story resonates with your life, if you know exactly what it means to stop being the invisible scapegoat and finally demand the justice you deserve, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now. Drop a comment below and let me know exactly where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single comment, and knowing you are out there gives me so much genuine hope. Remember, setting strict boundaries is not an act of revenge. It is the ultimate necessary act of self-preservation. You are not required to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. Take care of yourselves fiercely, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next story. 14 months have passed since the heavy mahogany doors of the Oak Ridge Valley Country Club swung shut behind my parents. 14 months since the grand illusion they had dedicated their entire lives to building shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces on that polished marble floor. When you spend your entire life bracing for the next disaster, peace feels incredibly strange at first. It takes time for your nervous system to understand that the threat is permanently gone. You wake up in the morning expecting a frantic phone call demanding money or a demeaning text message assigning you a humiliating chore. But the phone does not ring. The silence in the early morning is no longer a temporary pause between family crises. It is a permanent, beautiful reality. The justice system is frequently criticized for being slow and tedious, but when you present a seasoned financial crimes detective with an impeccably organized roadmap of fraud wire transfers and airtight medical alibis, the legal machinery turns with a terrifying, relentless momentum. Let me tell you about Susan Miller first. She was the devout church hospitality committee member who thought absolutely nothing of stamping away my entire financial future just to secure a slice of country club proximity for herself. When federal investigators arrived at her pristine suburban doorstep the morning after the rehearsal dinner, her profound loyalty to my mother evaporated faster than a drop of water on a hot skillet. Susan did not even attempt to protect Patricia or Robert. Faced with the incredibly grim reality of mandatory minimum sentences for felony notary fraud and criminal conspiracy, Susan folded immediately and completely. She sat in a cold interrogation room and confessed every single detail. She explained exactly how my father had brought the forged document to her house. She described how my mother had stood over her shoulder promising her an exclusive invitation to Cassidy High Society wedding and a permanent spot in their new wealthy social circle if she just applied her official state seal to the fake signature. Susan handed over text messages, voicemails, and church committee meeting notes to save her own skin. However, her eager cooperation did not save her from the severe consequences of her actions. The state board permanently revoked her notary commission. She was forced to plead guilty to a lesser felony charge to avoid spending years behind bars, which resulted in a massive fine and years of highly supervised probation. Her absolute social ruin in the community was total. The very same church friends who used to sip expensive tea in her living room completely ostracized her. She can no longer even walk into the local grocery store without people turning their backs and whispering about the woman who helped steal a young girl inheritance. With Susan willingly testifying against them and providing mountains of corroborating evidence, my parents had absolutely zero room to maneuver. There was no dramatic courtroom trial. There was no grandstand where my father could puff out his chest and try to smoothly talk his way out of the consequences. They were presented with a mountain of irrefutable, completely damning evidence and offered a very stark, unforgiving choice. They could take a plea deal that required total financial restitution and admitting their guilt on the public record, or they could face a jury trial and undoubtedly receive the maximum federal prison sentences for wire fraud and identity theft. The arrogant patriarch and the demanding matriarch were finally broken. They took the plea deal. But financial restitution requires actual capital, and my parents were utterly hopelessly broke. The beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house, the pristine suburban property I had secretly and painfully subsidized for 6 exhausting years, had already fallen into severe foreclosure. Without my monthly paycheck quietly feeding their mortgage account behind the scenes, the bank had swiftly and aggressively initiated repossession proceedings. To avoid the maximum prison sentence mandated by the court, my parents were forced to completely liquidate their entire estate. I watched from a calculated distance as the legal system stripped them of their fake royalty status. Their prized possessions were gathered and publicly auctioned off to the highest bidders. The antique dining table where they had proudly announced their theft to me was sold to complete strangers for a fraction of its value. Patricia's massive collection of designer handbags, the imported silk curtains, she constantly bragged about the luxury vehicles they paraded around town. Every single item was systematically stripped away. The court ordered that every single asset they owned be sold, and the proceeds directed straight back to my accounts until my $680,000 trust fund was completely restored. The court did not stop there. The judge also ordered Robert to repay the 6 years of back pay he owed me for the mortgage payments, the property taxes, and the utility bills he had maliciously manipulated me into covering under false pretenses. Today, Robert and Patricia Harper do not live in a sprawling suburban estate. They live in a cramped, generic, dimly lit 2-bedroom apartment in a rough industrial neighborhood located miles away from their old country club stomping grounds. Robert, the man who used to boast about fake commercial investment strategies while sipping top-shelf bourbon, is currently working as a night shift dispatcher at a local freight company. Patricia, the woman who screamed at caterers over the thread count of ivory cocktail napkins, is now spending her days bagging groceries and standing on her feet for 8 hours a shift at a discount supermarket. Their complete financial and social annihilation is a permanent fixture in their daily lives. And then there is Cassidy, my beautiful, highly favored golden child sister, who honestly thought throwing wild temper tantrums about imported orchids and demanding free labor from her sibling was her absolute birthright. When the Kensington family publicly and brutally severed all ties with our fraudulent family, Cassidy's entire social network abandoned her overnight. The wealthy friends she had carefully cultivated and desperately tried to impress vanished without a trace. They stopped answering her phone calls and blocked her on every single social media platform. Without Bryce's massive family fortune to fund her extravagant lifestyle, and without my stolen trust fund to quietly pay off her mounting credit card bills, Cassidy was violently forced to face the real world. She has no college degree, no marketable skills, and absolutely no work ethic. Currently, she works a grueling minimum wage retail job at a fading local shopping mall. She spends her days folding cheap synthetic sweaters, organizing clearance racks, and dealing with incredibly rude customers under harsh fluorescent lighting. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she is forced to take the public city bus to work every single morning because she can no longer afford to maintain a personal vehicle. She reportedly spends her brief lunch break sitting alone in the mall food court, scrolling endlessly through the profiles of the women who were supposed to be her bridesmaids. Watching them attend the lavish high society events she is now permanently banned from entering. As for me, the resolution of the court case brought an unprecedented, beautiful level of peace and security into my daily existence. Every single dollar of my grandfather trust fund was painstakingly recovered by the legal system and safely returned to my heavily protected accounts. The additional restitution covering the 6 years of intense financial abuse provided me with an incredibly substantial foundation to start my life completely over. I did not stay in that gray, gloomy city where my family had maliciously drained my youth and my energy. The very day the final wire transfer cleared my bank, I packed my most precious belongings into my car and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. I moved clear across the country to a vibrant, beautiful city, surrounded by towering green mountains and bright crystal-clear blue lakes. I used a portion of my fully recovered funds to purchase a stunning historic home, nestled in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. My new house has large bay windows that let the morning sun pour into the living room, a gorgeous wrap-around wooden porch, and a massive backyard garden where I spend my weekends growing fresh vegetables and brilliantly colored flowers. I wake up every single morning to the sound of songbirds instead of the terrifying, suffocating anxiety of looming family debts. I completely changed my career path as well. I transitioned from corporate medical billing into specialized forensic financial consulting. I now run my own highly successful independent firm where I specifically help vulnerable individuals track hidden assets, expose corporate fraud, and heavily protect themselves from domestic financial abuse. I use the exact same meticulous auditing skills that saved my own life to save others from being exploited by the people they trust the most. I am highly sought after, deeply respected in my professional field, and I absolutely love the work that I do. But without a doubt, the greatest achievement of my entirely new life is the beautiful chosen family I have carefully and intentionally built around myself. I am now surrounded by incredibly kind, fiercely loyal, and generous friends who value my presence, my mind, and my spirit, not my pocketbook. We regularly host lively Sunday dinners at my house, where everyone brings a delicious dish to share, and the laughter echoing through my dining room is always genuine and freely given. There are no toxic power struggles here. There is no cruel family ranking system. There is absolutely no expectation of unearned financial sacrifice. There is only unconditional support, mutual respect, and authentic love. Over the past 14 months, sitting on my quiet porch and watching the sun set over the mountains, I have had a lot of time to deeply reflect on the nature of familial duty and the heavy invisible chains we blindly allow others to place upon our shoulders. For most of my life, I truly believed that enduring emotional pain and constantly sacrificing my own comfort was the only possible way to earn love. I falsely thought my endless silence made me a noble daughter. I falsely thought my massive financial contributions and my endless patience would eventually make me worthy of my parents' genuine affection and my sister's basic respect. I learned the hardest, most painful way possible that this entire concept is a massive destructive lie. Conditional love is not love, it is a transaction. Setting boundaries with toxic family members is not a betrayal, it is survival. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep people warm who only see you as firewood. If the people who are supposed to protect you are the exact same ones actively working to destroy your future, you have the absolute undeniable right to walk away. You have the right to demand justice for yourself. You have the right to firmly reclaim the beautiful life they selfishly tried to steal from you. You do not owe your abusers your silence, your resources, or your continued presence in their lives. If you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace and future, type the word "free" in the comments below. Please hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. Until next time, remember your worth and never be afraid to take your life back.